So, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night, folks. Welcome to Karate Without Belts. I'm John, and I am joined by longtime collaborator, first time on the podcast, the wonderful Steel Mason himself, Sal.
Steel Maceman. Wow.
Mason.
Is it if you say Maceman, is it like it's my last name or is it Mace Man like Spider Man?
I don't know.
He's not
I have a very hard time knowing how to pronounce your last name. So,
that's okay.
so I'm just like um, the guy who does maces and looks really good for makes me look like the fat kid in the corner. Yeah, that guy. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Terrible. Moving. It
Yeah,
is what it
moving's never
is.
fun. Moving is never fun. We've in a couple of weeks we'll have been in this house for about a year. So a year ago we were moving and yeah, it's not fun.
No, no. Well, I'm doing it by myself, so it's like, The worst part about moving is you put everything in a box, and then you get the box and you send the box, and then you get back to your place and you're just like, oh, that had like three things that I needed,
Yep.
and then what was should have been in the there's like five things here that should have been in that box.
Yeah. It's like a chicken or the egg sort of thing. It's like if you box it up then you know you're gonna need it later. If you don't box it up, then you're just it's more stuff that you have to worry about. Yeah.
And yeah, it's ridiculous. And then I've got to clean up some other guy's stuff who was here before me too. So kind of pulling double duty. Enough gnashing of teeth over moving. Zal, what have you been up to in terms of training this week?
Yeah, this week and probably the past few weeks, they've really been getting a lot more into my yoga than my karate actually, and that's just because my schedule's changed a bit, so I've been able to make some more yoga classes, and I've been just really focusing on just some of my flexibility and mobility as it relates to my karate and my martial arts. So I'm always practicing all of those things, but I'd say right now there's probably more of an emphasis on my flexibility and mobility. Just no particular reason other than it's just sort of the way things happen. I tend not to have too much of a plan in my workouts, but I've just sort of fallen into this routine lately where I'm just doing more mobility work and such.
That's interesting. The last three podcasts I've recorded, everyone has had a very similar goal in that
Really?
regard. Yeah, I feel that gets into one of the things we want to talk about, but also just kind of the unspoken issues that come up in training is just like mobility, flexibility, endurance, figuring out different ways to train around different body issues and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
It isn't just straight on the dojo floor, everybody bow in and get going. Like it
Yeah. For me, it's more, I mean, there's certainly nothing wrong with just getting on the dojo floor and just, hammering out your kata and your kihon and all that stuff and doing that. But, I feel like particularly as you get older, you need to spend more time just maintaining the actual your actual body itself. I mean, karate without any sort of maintenance work can be pretty hard on your body if you're not, doing some of the extra, taking some of the care you need to, address your mobility, your strength, and those things are certainly byproducts of your actual karate training. But when you put more of an emphasis on it, I think it does a lot more to just contribute to the longevity of your practice. So, you're not limping when you're walking on the floor because you trained too hard the night before in karate. It's just for me, it's sort of a restoration. So, squeezing a yoga class over my lunch hour and then going to the dojo later in the evening. I usually feel pretty good because I'm limber, I'm loose, and ready for some good hard training. But I just feel it's better for my recovery as well. So it's for as frequently as I train, I try to just make sure I get mobility and flexibility work almost daily if I can.
I think I mentioned this on a different area we talked on before, or a different platform, which was really kind of the same platform, just different, called something different.
Right.
But my just Pavlovian, something like that, unconscious psychological discrimination towards yoga, and just because of one of the past places I trained, and just I know it's like knowing, like I know yoga's fine, I know it'll be fine. It's like being afraid of heights. I know yoga's fine. I know yoga's good for me. I just don't
Yeah.
like. It actually feels good when you start doing it. Just I can't do it. So,
Yeah, it definitely. I mean, I think yoga definitely has a certain societal stigma with it, where and not one that I agree with at all. But I mean, where it's seen as not really, it's not a masculine practice, right? I mean, the sort of public image of yoga for the most part is it's sort of something that women do and
Right.
something that ladies do. And I've definitely had men make comments like, "Oh, you do yoga? Like, do you wear tights too?" And like, I'm like, and I don't really care. I'm like, I'm there because it makes me feel good. It's good for my mobility and for my health. And I would do it every day if I could.
Yeah. What's wrong with men in tights?
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely nothing wrong with it. We got trees, we got birds. We'll do yoga everywhere.
Yeah, but I think a lot of people just are sort of self-conscious, and so it's hard for them to put themselves in some of those in like a yoga class where they might feel uncomfortable. But really everybody's just there for their own practice. There's no judgment. You're just there to do the best you can and enjoy your own personal practice.
And that feeds over into the karate, where it's like, if you hadn't done that, do you feel you'd be able to approach your karate the same day, the same way?
No, and as we talked before, I got into yoga because of injury, and I know now that a lot of the injuries that I had in the past, primarily with my back, were because of my karate training. Because I was not training I wasn't taking into account that maintenance that I talked about that you need to do, and so I think I was pushing myself too hard. I was creating some problems for myself because of how I was training my karate, and then when I started really looking internally at the mechanics, the biomechanics of how these things work, and getting into different body alignment and structure and things like that yoga really helped me with. That really transformed how I approach my karate, because now I approach my karate from from that health and longevity standpoint, and ensuring that I'm spending more time on those biomechanics rather than, okay, well, how high am I kicking or how hard am I punching? Like, I don't really care about that stuff anymore. It's more just about how smoothly or how well I can move my body functionally.
It's weird that the adage nowadays, I guess everything old is new. I feel like there was a emphasis on that for a long time, and then it kind of got shuttered for a different goal of fighting or something like that, and not even realizing that in order to even be a fighter with any sort of longevity, you need to have, otherwise
Absolutely.
you end up just essentially crippled. So
Absolutely. And I mean, you look at some of the Gichin Funakoshi. I mean, he said karate should be enjoyed by anybody at any age. And I mean, I really think that he looked at it from a health perspective, and because he knew that training hard all the time and doing, whether that's full contact sparring or something like that, I mean, you sort of have a short career. You can only do that for so long before your body just doesn't put up with that kind of abuse anymore. And I mean, there's nothing wrong with that approach. If you enjoy it, then great. But if you want to be still able to participate in those activities when you're in your 40s, 50s, and up, then you got to take care of yourself. You can't just be going full bore all the time. It's gonna wreck you. And I have some of my predecessors, some of my senseis. They nowadays they're up in years, and they don't move so well anymore, because they come from that generation where it was common to say, all right, we're going out in the parking lot and we're gonna do break falls, and we're gonna do break falls on the concrete, and we're gonna do throws on the concrete, because it's important that we are hard and tough. And I just kind of think I don't think that's right anymore. I mean, this was the generation of your black belt test for your Shodan needs to be 5 hours long, and if somebody doesn't puke on the mat, then it wasn't a good test, and if there was no bloodshed, then it wasn't a good test. And I'm like, that's not what I'm about. I mean, I get it. I mean, that's not knocking people that are into that. That's just not my approach anymore.
we don't want the bloodshedders to feel offended by this podcast. Well, and what's interesting is it brings up a little adage, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And it's like,
Sure.
Yeah, sure. What doesn't kill you? It's smacking the pavement with your ribs and hip and all that other stuff. No, it won't kill you, but it will definitely make you weaker and inevitably probably lead to your downfall. Yeah. The idea that these guys, which is interesting because if you think about it, it's like the generation who came before them, I don't really feel was doing that, or where they had initially learned it or even had exposure to it. I feel there's some weird idea imported into that, where it's just like, well, if you're tough, you're tough, and if you're not, you're not, and that's all it's gonna be. And
yeah, and I don't think it's. I mean, certainly, like I said, it's definitely going that hardcore route is definitely a way to. It's a way to do things, right? I mean, if your goal is, if you're doing competition, if you're doing full contact competition, then I mean, the context with which you train is important, right? I mean, if you're just doing, like to no contact sparring with the ambitions of going full contact, well, I mean, you're not really doing yourself any favors. You want to train for what your intended use of the art is. But, if you're like me, an IT person who's working on a keyboard all day, I mean, why do I need to go to the dojo and bloody my knuckles and, bruise my ribs and go that hardcore if I have no intention of ever using that in that way? I mean, a lot of times it depends on where you live too. I mean, people who live in maybe more violent communities or something, they tend to, they might have a need to have some more serious and violent training, and that's fine. But I mean, for where I'm at, I mean, I'm fortunate that I don't tend to have to worry about those things too much. But I try to take care of myself and train to the point where should something happen, God forbid, that I could competently de-escalate or handle myself. But I don't have any sort of illusions about I'm not training people to go 12 rounds in a ring or anything like that. It's training for civilian self-defense rather than, that competition mindset.
Well, and the competition mindset can also be thrown by that. We're going to train the intention of training really hard, but in actuality only doing kind of the semi-contact stuff.
Yeah,
then you're essentially fooling yourself into training that's not going to actually fit what you want. But at the same time, the overly violent stuff tends to breed the issues that it's all trying to combat.
Yeah.
So that can also be an issue. But in our training, we had talked about this a little, that things over time change. As you mentioned before, age changes the way you approach things. Mm-hmm. Different time periods change the way we look at things. And I think one tact I wanted to get into today, and I feel you're a great person to do this with, is the inevitabilities of training. And there's inevitabilities that we always face that aren't really explicitly told to us. No teacher is going to sit you down and be like, all right, this is what's going to happen to your training.
Yeah.
These are just things we end up discovering, consciously or unconsciously. And I wanted to get your perspective on that, as somebody who's had to do that, and somebody who's seen that happen with others. And I think one thing, we just mentioned it, but I think one thing I want to kind of start with is kind of understanding where our teachers were at the time that we were learning. I don't think this is something we really consider a lot, is that our teachers were in a certain place when they were teaching whatever version of what we were learning.
Yeah.
What a lot of people end up doing is they say, well, that's the way it's done. That's the way it's always been done. And that's the way my teacher did it.
Yep.
Yet at the same time, they're not taking consideration. They had learned from somebody else. They had probably learned something different, and the way their teacher might be doing that now, probably not the same as when you learned it.
Sure. Yeah.
So,
I was just going to say, I think coincidentally, I was having a conversation with one of my brown belts here within the past couple of weeks that's sort of related to this topic, and that he's very interested in sort of how, because my sensei is not around anymore in terms of, he doesn't have much of a presence anymore in the dojo. He stops in when he's able, but it's really not very often. So I often get questions from students like, well, what was it like training under him? What sort of things did you do? Because a lot of people who have been around since the time that he was around, they recognize that I kind of do things a little bit differently. And, he taught very different techniques. We teach the same syllabus for the most part, but, I've sort of evolved in the way I teach compared to the way he taught. And, he had a much stronger, for example, he had a strong Taekwondo background before he got into karate. And so he really enjoyed doing some of the fancier kicks from Taekwondo. I don't tend to teach those too much anymore because, one, I have more of a practical mindset in my teaching. And so, I don't tend to cover jump spinning hook kicks too much, but that's something he loved. It was just something that he really enjoyed with his teaching. So we spent a lot of time on that stuff back when he was doing more of the teaching, but I tend to stick to more of the basic kicks now: front kick, side kick, roundhouse kick, and so forth. So some of that has changed, and so I will often talk about just sort of the different ways that he taught versus the way I teach and so forth.
Do you feel that you can kind of see that he had imported stuff and he had put stuff in there from his own experience, and that from that you could decide whether or not what could to import from your experience.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, he definitely, so he had at least two, one, two, I mean, he worked with at least three or four different senseis as he was coming up, on his journey. And so, the way he taught, he had elements of all of those different teachers, that he expressed through the way he taught. I've been now training sort of without my sensei for much longer than I actually trained with him. I only trained with him for about 6 or 7 years, and then he sort of started stepping away from formal teaching, and then eventually was just not teaching anymore at all. So, I've been working on my own for 14 or 15. And so a lot of what I do now is based on my own, just sort of continually iterating on the things that he taught me, but also things that I picked up along the way and through my own experience and so forth. So I would say now there's even less and less of his influence on what I cover now. I mean, compared to, if you and I had this conversation maybe, 10 years ago, I probably would have still been teaching a lot of the same stuff that he did, but now I don't so much.
Did you ever feel conflicted about having to progress or have that inevitability of like, well, he's not really here anymore, or he's not really going to give me much advice, or he doesn't need to give me advice on this. I've got to be the decision maker on what I do. Did you ever feel a conflict internally?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. There's definitely periods where, and this sort of goes back to the concept of shuhari, the cycle of learning, where you go that stage of where you're trying to copy everything your teacher does for, just word for word, or just do exactly as they do, and then you try to transcend and you move beyond that. So this is sort of related to that. But I mean, yeah, definitely. I mean, there was a time where, any opportunity that, even if he was just stopping in the dojo for a few minutes, it's like, hey, can you look at this kata that I'm doing? Because I want to make sure I'm doing this the way you're doing it. And then gradually over time, I started to not look to him for validation quite so much, because I knew that I had to take ownership of my own journey. And it took a while to get to where I was accepting of the fact that, I'm sort of on my own in that sense. And, we all are. I mean, even people who are in big, giant dojos or big, giant martial arts schools, I mean, martial arts, whatever style you do, is a very individual journey. And at some point, if you stick with it long enough, you're going to be on your own. And some people are okay with that, and they're able to move on and keep going. And I think some people hit that point where, that might be where they change styles, or they start cross-training in another style, because they have to continually have sort of new content. And if they don't feel like they're getting fed new content all the time, that they're not progressing. So rather than just continuing to work on the things that they've already been given, they tend to branch out. Nothing wrong with it. It's just, everybody sort of takes a different path up that mountain. But for me, it was sort of coming to a point, and I don't know exactly when this happened, of looking at, he's already sort of my sensei had already sort of given me everything that he could have. I had all the kata, I had all the material. It was just a matter of working on that over and over and over and over again, and unpacking it and making it my own. And like I said, just sort of taking ownership of my own progress, of my own journey. And yeah, really just making everything my own as I move forward.
It's so slippery, because you get a lot of people who get dogmatic about what people had taught when they taught it, or what versions of things are more authentic. I've had to deal with that too many times in my career. What's sad is that this type of conversation, you feel like, especially from the kind of Bruce Lee American, we gotta progress, you gotta, make it on your own and all this other stuff. But then, like, they'll have the kind of paradoxical, no, you can't do that, you can't change that, you can't, what are you doing? You're not doing the right way, or something like that. And it's like, did you not see that the people who taught you did the exact same thing?
Right, yeah. Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, the organizations have been just completely collapsed due to just those types of disagreements between instructors and so forth, over someone wanting to change something, somebody not, somebody saying, no, we have to keep things the way they were. But I mean, all martial arts it's about change. It's about adaptability. And if you're not adapting your martial art to yourself, meaning either your actual body type and so forth, or just with the changing of the times or whatever, it's sort of back to that whole hardcore training mentality. People aren't, I mean, at least where I am right now, people aren't going to put up with me saying, all right, guys, we're going out to the parking lot to do some break falls, like it or love it. This is what we're doing. I would lose students left and right. Now, 15 years ago, that might have been okay. There've been people that would have said, yeah, let's do this. But here, it's not happening. And there's teachers that are still like that. They're losing students because they refuse to adapt the way they teach. They say, no, the old ways are the best. I grew up doing hardcore training. You're going to do hardcore training. I think you can still have hardcore training, but make it so that you're not crippling yourself and not, running people out of the door because you made them crack their skull open on the concrete or something, it's.
And this is something too, always as a teacher, it's like, you're never going to be able to give your students that one night you had with everybody in the class and everyone was doing their best and it was the greatest time ever. It's like, you can only explain that. You can only kind of get together with some beers and talk about that. You can't replicate it.
Right. Yeah.
Which is, and I feel there's a mentality to be like, well, I already did that work. And of course, I understand that.
Yeah.
That means everyone understands that.
Right.
Which is unfortunate. But it happens way too often and people aren't thinking, well, what experiences can I give? What way can I replicate that for this particular group of people?
Absolutely. And there's ways to do that without, collectively suffering. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not anti hard training. I think training should be good and hard, but I'm more against training that is unsafe for your health. Right.
Right.
And, so I would always hear a lot where we would have a belt test, for example. And some of the older sensei would say, well, it was a good test, but, back when we tested, you guys would have been all, you all would have had buckets of vomit over there. And one of you would have, it's not as hard as it used to be. Not as hard as, okay, well, that's fine. But, we don't do things that way anymore. And just be okay with that. It doesn't, it's.
Well, and then it's like, why aren't you in that place anymore?
Right.
What changed? And then, is it that you became less hardcore? Is it because you got older? Is it because you lost a group of people who was able to actually support that and it wasn't just you? There's a lot of things there for that. What's really sad is that I've heard that, but I've also seen people get really upset when there's just the flub to be like, oh yeah, whatever, just do this, and okay, there's the rank, and then people get extremely mad because they went through these hard experiences, and then you have a bunch of people who just don't care to replicate that experience or it's too hard for them.
Exactly. I mean, it's the whole, I had to walk 7 miles uphill in the snow to get to school and you have it easy sort of thing. Well, there's
some truth to that in some ways.
Sure. Yeah.
And I think you need to have the spirit of what's there. It's not necessarily have to be 100% the same of what's ever been done before. Good Lord, I mean, there's some fads of like workout and stretching and stuff that I just, what is it? I had somebody tell me, it's like, every time you see wood, you got to hit your knuckles up against it. And I was young and impressionable at the time, and I was like, yeah. And so I went back to when I was teaching when I was a college kid. I was telling that to my students. It's like, yeah, you got to hit the wood every time you see it. And I was like punching trees and like trying to condition my shin up against a concrete wall. That didn't last too long. So you get impressions of this stuff, and then you end up doing it, and it's just like, maybe this isn't a good idea. Maybe they had it wrong.
Right. Well, I mean, and sort of what I was getting to earlier is that it really comes down to the context for what you're training. Like I said, if your goal is to do that really hardcore competition, full contact stuff, or you're in a environment where extreme violence is a regular thing, then hopefully your training is going to prepare you for that sort of stuff, and that might mean your training has to be pretty severe. I get that, but telling someone whose day job is they're bagging groceries every day and they live a pretty calm and peaceful life. I mean, why does that person need to beat their knuckles to death to where they can't, to where they've got these huge calluses on there just because that's the hardcore way to train? I mean, what for? It doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, I used to bag groceries, and that was actually, I felt like between that and working in a bank, where the two times I was like, yeah, somebody could come in here and really screw me up. So
well, when you're young, you hope that happens, right? Because then you're like, yeah, my opportunity, I'm gonna save everybody.
Yeah,
demonstrate my martial arts skills.
Yeah, I was not that. I was like, no, I don't want this to happen. Because you're on your feet for like 8 hours, and you don't want you're like it's stagnation on your feet, and it wears you out, and you're just like, I don't want to fight somebody. I'm already tired.
Yeah.
I gotta.
Yeah, I mean, I was
not even supposed to be here today.
Right. I was a doorman on our college campus here in my early 20s when I first moved here. And, I, of course, at that time, I was probably a young purple belt or something, and of course you have all these romantic ideas of, oh yeah, just someone step out of line here in the bar and I'm going to demonstrate, how cool I am. But I mean, reality it was a really boring job. And, I was just checking IDs, and if something went wrong, you call the cops. It wasn't, it was not, it was not like a Patrick Swayze movie or something.
I swear, I complete digression. I had a student who was upper elementary school and was like, Mr. John, do you know who Patrick Swayze is? Young Japanese kid. I'm like, how do you know who Patrick Swayze is?
Really?
And then the kind of mid-20s teacher who I was working with was like, who's Patrick Swayze? And we just kind of and it just had this like moment where it's like this like not even teens student and me just kind of looked at him and was like, what's wrong with you?
All right, everybody sit down. We're watching Roadhouse.
No. That's not what happened. That's oh god, now I got to edit this part out. No, Roadhouse is what we're going to eventually cover that on this podcast, because to my mind that is hillbilly Chinese connection. That's exactly what it is. It's hillbilly Chinese connection. That's exactly what it is. It's a Bruce Lee movie, just it's in the Midwest. That's exactly what it is. That was a fun digression. Yes. We should stay here, but unfortunately.
Training inevitability.
Yeah, training inevitabilities. Well, one thing I think that is inevitable, but is also somewhat of a trap, is a re-examination of your base. And I feel I've had to do this, and I've been caught in the trap of like constantly having to re-examine what my base was, and knowing like, okay, this is what I did before. This is how I was originally taught. Some other people are kind of kicked my ass, and maybe okay, I need to re-examine how I do that. I've had those experiences and kind of talked about them a little on here, and I know you've kind of changed how you've done things over time. How often do you feel you need to re-examine your base, both in terms of your training and then in terms of kind of how you spotlight things in your curriculum?
How are you defining base? So are you talking just like your foundational skills, your foundational system, or
what you would do on the normal for how you train, right? So I had a base of that was just like ramshackle. You're doing a little karate over here, a little footwork over here, maybe this odd sparring drill over here, and then like 5 hand-picked things from different arts over here. That was kind of my initial work and training, and then I had worked with a more traditional, straightforward curriculum, and then it was all just kihon. Nothing in terms of like endurance or training or like sparring and whatnot. Now how I re-examine my base is that it has to be a little bit of everything, but it all has to be connected.
Yes.
That kind of in summary journey with that. But for a little while I was constantly questioning, is this right? Is this right? Do I do this? What's the most important? I don't know. And especially when you step out on your own, it's just an inevitability of like, what is important? I need to decide that. I don't know, you've thrown in a lot of kind of, I don't want to say imported anything, but like made good use of the mace, have made good use of other stuff that isn't necessarily showed up in your curriculum.
Right.
And I guess, is that something you had to re-examine? You ever had a struggle in re-examining?
So yeah, it's funny because you said you had kihon over here and this over here and this over here. Everything's just sort of disconnected. And I definitely, again, I couldn't tell you exactly when this happened, but I started. It was at this point where I was still very much copying the curriculum and the teaching methods of my sensei. And at that time, we had our kihon, we had our kata syllabus, which is just a Shotokan kata. And then we had and we would spar every now and then. But then we had separate, sort of pre-built what we called self-defense techniques for each rank. So each rank you learned like 2 or 3 different self-defense techniques, and you had to perform those at a test. And if you did them right, great, you're good. And there's nothing wrong with them, right? They were good, effective techniques. There were a lot of soft style grappling sort of stuff, Nikkyo, Yonkyo, different throws and things like that. Perfectly valid techniques. But after a while, and this was really as I started getting more into understanding kata application, I started thinking about, well, why, if my kata is supposed to be for self-defense, why do we have this separate list of self-defense techniques that has absolutely no relationship whatsoever to the kata? And I definitely hit a point where I'm like, you know what? I'm just not going to teach those things anymore. My sensei's not around. He doesn't care. So I focused more on the kata and started extracting the applications from the kata. And I tried to use the kata as the tool to teach my students. So it was, we learn the kata and then we break down the movements with partners and start exploring how those movements, because I wanted the kata to be useful to the student, not just something that they make look pretty for their belt test, right? And then, all right, they still have no idea what these different movements mean. I want them to be able to use the techniques that are in there. So it was sort of like I threw out all these self-defense techniques as a separate piece of the curriculum and shift gradually. This wasn't like an overnight thing. This took a few years. But gradually shifted to where, the student is responsible at the time of their test. And this is sort of where the way I teach is probably a pretty big deviation from what you might find in like a traditional Shotokan school. Not only are they having to perform their kata, but they're going to demonstrate, applications from that kata, and not like long distance applications, sparring type stuff, but it's all usually generally close range grappling type applications. And so I really wanted those kata to be able to, that's the most important thing. Everything that we do gets tied back to the kata. Our kihon is pulled from the kata. The way we move is related to the kata. And so, you mentioned the mace training and everything else. I definitely also hit a point where I recognized that, I had no problem memorizing kata or performing them, right? It was like, okay, I can learn another one, that's fine. But they were sort of hollow, right? I didn't have a good structure to make the techniques in the kata work. And so gradually, as I started getting into yoga and different types of strength training, climbing and so forth, I started focusing more on building structure that would support the kata, that would support the applications to make them more functional. And that's a big change from the way we used to do things. And that's primarily how I teach now, where we spend a lot of time just on a kata, the different movements within them. And, it's a lot of partner work, looking at how the different movements work and helping them understand how their body alignment and structure and so forth plays a part in making those techniques work, and addressing things like body size. I have a young lady in my class she's kind of short. Generally, for the most part, she's the shortest person in class. And when she gets paired with someone much bigger, a lot of the things that I might have demonstrated, said, okay, you guys are going to do this thing. She's like, Sensei, that I can't do that on this person. He's this much taller. Okay, let's look at how you can adapt the movements to your body type. Previously, that was something that wasn't done. It was just make it work, right? Even though realistically, this person is never, ever going to make this technique work due to their body size differences. I want to make the art work for the student, right? And if they are constantly failing at a technique because of their physical limitations, such as their height, then that's not a formula for success, right? They have to understand that they can make this thing work for them. They just have to make certain adjustments for that to work. And that's something you don't see a whole lot of, I don't think, but it's something that I think pretty seriously in my teaching, is I want them to be able to use what I'm teaching them. I don't want, I think, I haven't watched it yet, but I saw you and Dan talking about, there's a movie called Paper Tigers, I think. I'm trying not to create paper tigers. I don't want them to just have pretty kata with no function behind it. I want their kata to be functional and for them to be able to use the techniques that are in there, so that if I ever get hit by a car or whatever, they can still take their kata and continue to learn from their kata just as I have.
As I've said to somebody else rather recently, we can put a man on a moon, but we can't make him bus-proof. What kind of
That's right.
This is the true vulnerability we've seen from 2020. It's what we got to move closer towards as a society. No more paper tigers. We need to be bus-proof.
Yep.
That's our next evolution as humanity. But you're right in stating that, and what you said was a formula for success. And that leads me to kind of this point, because we were talking about kind of where our teachers were, where we started from, and where we go, and then also how we pass it down, and the inevitability of seeing people, giving them something to go towards success, but understanding we can give them everything, we can throw everything we know and love at them.
Mm-hmm.
Inevitably, they're gonna go somewhere else, or it's gonna be something else, or they're gonna be something else. And understanding and being okay with, or they're going to take something you say and go a completely different way with it than you ever intended. And I'm interested to know what or if you've seen that yet.
I don't know that I've seen it too much. I mean, I that's probably not true. I see it quite a bit, mostly because I'm in a college town, and so I have very few students that have been with me for a long time, mostly because people who are here very temporarily.
Right.
So I'm lucky if I get 5-6 years out of a student before they've finished up their education here, and then they're moving on to wherever. I've got a couple that have been with me for a long time. So I really try, for the ones that are just here temporarily, I really try to make sure that I give them something that they can take with them, and I'm always happy to help them find another place to train wherever they're going, sometimes I can, sometimes I can't. But I've sort of made peace with the fact that they might quit altogether, or they might get into something else, and I'm just sort of a little blip on their journey and their martial path, if that's what you want to call it. And I've always been okay with that. I'm a pretty laid back teacher in terms of I want people to make the art their own. I'm not out there to create cookie cutters copies of myself. And that's not the case with some teachers. If you don't do things exactly the way they're doing it, they get kind of upset about that. And I don't really care. What I want to see is that a student can make the techniques and such work for themselves, for their body type and so forth, that they're able to move well. And if I can get them to do that, to help them with that understanding, then it doesn't matter what martial art they go off and study after they work with me, whether they keep doing what I taught them or they go to something else, I don't really care. I'm not here to pass on my art so that once I'm dead, someone's still teaching it. If that happens, great. If not, then it's been a fun ride. Like I said, I'm just sort of laid back about it. Definitely, though, you talked about, where our senseis were at that time when we were working with them. And my sensei was definitely, because I talked about, I now focus more on the kata and making it useful. He was towards the end when he was still working with me a lot. This was at a time where kata application, I don't want to call it a fad. It's not a fad, but I mean, it's really become more popular within the last 10 years or so. Back when I was working with him, it was still kind of, we didn't have a whole lot. There was no Ian Abernathy yet. There wasn't any of these big names out there who were popularizing practical application. It just wasn't there yet.
In the way, not in the way it's kind of advertised now.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, there's
that would be my only pushback on that. But
yeah. I mean, you can get on YouTube and say, okay, what's the application for? Let me see some practical applications for this kata or whatever. It just couldn't do it. It wasn't there. Right. But my sensei knew about kata application, and he knew there was something more there than just performing the kata. So, I mean, he did his best to instill in me a curiosity about there's something more here. And if you keep working on this, you will find something. And I think it is thanks to that I was able to take that ownership of my training that I talked about, even though it took a while. It was, it's kind of like, well, my sensei's gone, but I have all these books that he left behind. There's answers here somewhere. If I keep going through these, I'm going to find them. And I feel like I did. And I was able to, be successful and continuing. If I hadn't, I'd have quit a long time ago. So, I'm definitely grateful to him for at least instilling that curiosity. Like, look, this is as far as I've taken it. If you take it from here, you're gonna keep progressing. You just have to sort of keep working with this material.
And it's tough to know where Sal's pulling his goblet out.
Yes, my goblet.
What is in this goblet tonight?
Let's see. Today I've got a juice jorts from Maplewood in Chicago, one of my favorite breweries.
Okay, right on. This is what this podcast is not sponsored by.
Yeah.
We'll never have sponsors. What am I saying? The thing I've realized is that you're always going to be planting seeds. You're never going to get, even from the best of times, you're never going to get people to completely take what you do and replicate it. Yep. And if you do, you end up having kind of a facsimile of a facsimile of a facsimile. You really want that to happen. And I think if you push them to show with anybody, they're going to say no. That's not what they want. Mm-hmm. I realized this when I had been in very, kind of in the state of where my mind is now, except my excuse was jet lag. And I was just going through something. I was, on this, coffee spree of like teaching, and I was going through this exercise that I no longer do. I was said something to the effect of to somebody like, it looks oh, it's all sloppy, but really there's a lot more there than most people think. And I kind of walked away from the conversation. Somebody who was much senior than me, I was just kind of had to teach this exercise to, and then he came back to me a year later. He's like, "You were so right. There's so much here," and I was like, "What? You said that thing?" And I was like,
"You didn't even realize it." Yeah.
I guess, yeah, sure. For something I don't even do anymore, for something I personally don't feel there's a lot of value behind, or at least the value of it could be found elsewhere, or we don't realize, the seeds that we plant and where they end up growing. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the unintended consequence of interacting, and because martial arts is so weird in that regard, because it's never just a solo practice. You're right from what you were saying before. It is very much in the individual. But paradoxically, it's also the communal. It's always going to be, because you can't just do martial arts a priori.
Yeah. Mm.
It's the first time I've used that term on the podcast. You have to be within community, and you're always going to be bouncing off people in terms of what you do. But then what ends up happening with that is a lot of way out of your control.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So that's what I feel is so interesting about just this topic, where it's like, yeah, there's these inevitabilities we never talk about, and there's these things that our teachers try to give us, but they never know where it's going to go. And that's really good of you, I think, to be so accepting and so laid back from what you have from people when they come in, and then whatever they do next. Because so many people I've seen are very, very hamstrung tight on what they do and feel it's so important. But
yeah,
you seem to have developed to a point where it's like, this is what I can show people, and then they get to where they want to go.
Yeah, and it's not, and I don't want to give the impression that I sort of let people do whatever they want. It's that,
right.
I'm still teaching a core curriculum, absolutely. But, fortunately or unfortunately, my school is pretty small. So, I mean, at any given time, I probably have no more than 6 or 7 students on the tatami at a time. So, I try to take a more individualistic approach to how I'm working with them, and very different working with a smaller group than it would be if I was teaching, a class full of 30 students. I mean, you can't really do a lot of the individual refinement and attention when you've got 30 people on the mat. You just look around and make sure that everybody's at least doing the front snap kick that you asked them all to do. And you make very big, broad, gross body movement type corrections. Whereas when you have a small class, you can really work with them on, their structure and everything. And you can take that time to do that. And I definitely prefer working with that smaller size than a bigger size, for that very reason, because it allows me to have that flexibility. Like I said, I'm not here to make copies of myself. I want them to be able to use the thing that I'm teaching them. And, my friend, David Gimberline, who I think I've mentioned before, he's fond of saying, karate should be useful from the very beginning, right? If you're not able to use anything that you've been taught from the time you're a white belt, right? I mean, the stuff you're learning at white belt, you should be able to use that. It shouldn't be that you have to be a black belt before the techniques can be used effectively. So,
heard that way too much.
Yeah.
Heard that
I try to
way
really
too
emphasize that function from the get-go, right? So, I mean, if they're a white belt, yeah, they're learning how to break fall. They're learning how to take someone to the ground. They're doing all of this stuff from the very beginning. They're learning about structure and alignment and all of that, because why wait? I've actually had people say, you should really wait till you teach that stuff. Like, well, I mean, maybe just get them the gross body movements, and then you can teach us. Like, why wait? What's the big secret? Why hold back? Just teach them what it is now. Why do you need to wait until they're a black belt to tell them that, hey, everything you learned up until this point is wrong? Now you need to do things differently. Why would you do that to someone? That's terrible.
I have heard and seen this attitude, but never understood it.
Yeah.
Like, this is how you teach white belts. This is how you teach black belts.
Right.
And like gross body movement, don't worry about the details. Camp, or kind of part of the spectrum. But then there's like, well, this is what it's really going to be used for. And it's like, nah,
yeah.
You're going to use the paint the fence to paint the fence paint the fence. Like, like you're gonna do the real thing at first, because you want the people to be able to do the real thing. And that's more like rank guarding than anything else. If people are just worried about people walking out the door with stuff,
or the whole thing. Well, now we teach you the secret stuff. You're among the black belts, so now we're going to teach you what that rising block movement really was for. It's not actually a block, by the way. Well, I tell white belts that when they're a white belt. Yeah, it's not just a block. It's all these other things as well, because I want you to be able to use this tool that I just showed you how to use. Yeah, that, like you said, guarding the secrets or something, like, oh, you have to wait until you're a serious student before I can tell you that, this is actually a choke and not a outside block or something like that. Well, why wait? Just tell them what it is.
It's a very 1990s thing too, because I feel like
Yeah.
anybody can find that now. Like anyone can find now. Like, I feel there's enough people out there who say that stuff where it's like, the block isn't really a block; it's more of a strike, and then that leaves these people open to like charlatans, essentially, who will take
Sure.
a lot of money from people, from other people, right?
Right.
Because if you're worried about the business,
Mm-hmm.
to learn the stuff you're not teaching, right? Or the stuff, and then they get frustrated and whatever. And it's like, just go for it, do what you can.
Yeah. And you're sort of managing their expectations in a sense. And I find myself saying a lot to some of my students that when you get up into the black belt ranks, I mean, whatever perception there is with the general public or the media about what a black belt is, I mean, that's a whole other podcast in itself, I'm sure. But, people think they're going to start learning all these secret techniques and these advanced techniques, and really you're just doing the same techniques. You're just getting better at them. So, I always tell my students, like, I'm not teaching a new stuff. You're seeing the same techniques that you saw when you were a blue belt. You're better at them, and you're getting better at using them. Like, there's no secrets here, guys. Like, I'm an open book. I'm not holding anything back from you. It's like, what you see is what you get. You don't suddenly become exposed to all the secret pieces of the art when you're a Nidon or something like that. It's not the case.
And having that attitude prevents a lot of like other crappy inevitabilities, right? That actually you can avert people from, I don't want to say like looking over the other fence, but then just being like, if you are open with them and you can manage their expectations in that regard, then they don't have like their own fantasy version. And everyone goes through this, but they don't have their own fantasy version of whatever you're doing. Like, you're very real with them at first. They'll have more of a very real idea of what's happening.
Yeah.
And the other side of that is like, if you're so quote unquote mysterious or whatever with it, you're just setting people up to fail.
Yeah, and I've been through that coming up, through the Q ranks where I would hear senseis say, "Oh, well, your ki is not strong enough. Once you do that kata more, your ki will be developed, and then you'll understand. Do that kata 10,000 more times, then you're like, really, you just don't know, dude." But yeah, it's I don't keep any secrets. I'm like, this is what if a blue belt says, "Hey, can I learn this kata that's Godan level kata?" Yeah, sure, I'll take you through it. I don't care. It's not like I said, I'm not going to ask you to do the kata at a test, but if you want me to take you through Sochin, we can go through Sochin. I don't care. Learn it. Why not?
Yeah, and then they'll probably find out, oh, well, maybe I don't really need to know that. I'm like, maybe you don't.
Like, you want to play with it? You can play with it. It's like, here, read this book. Well, you're not going to understand a word in it until maybe you're older, but yeah, why not? But there's definitely some places that be like, no, you're a blue belt. You're not going to touch that yet until you've gotten at least Sandan or something.
Yeah,
I just don't.
And maybe that's a bit of a different conversation, but it's like, not demystification, like, and making sure demystification is like on the floor at first prevents a lot of problems.
Yeah, I think that's a good word to use for it. It's demystification. Absolutely.
Well, Sal, I mean, we've gone through a lot, and I feel we've inevitably come to a decent kind of wrap point. Anything else you want to kind of drop the mic on in terms of this topic?
Mic drops? I don't know if I have any mic drops.
Damn it. Closing monologue?
Closing monologue. I don't know if that's what qualifies as a monologue, but like, because you talked about just sort of what my approach is to some things, and really particularly as I've gotten older, but it's just I really just I'm laid back. I keep an open mind, and I really try to instill that in my students that there's more than one way to skin a cat, and what I'm teaching you is not I don't claim to have any sort of, this is not the one way to do things. There are many ways to do things, and I think everybody should really take that approach in their martial arts training and just learn as many things as you want, and then make it work for yourself. I think you'll get a lot more out of your training when you take that approach.
And that's such a simple idea that's just not put out there in not enough. I feel it's been out, it's out there, but it's not enough people have that approach. And I feel more people are warming up to it, more people are getting to it, but it kind of runs in cycles. You get the kind of summer of love, and then you get the Reagan administration. Did I just say that? Anybody can interpret that to mean what they want to. All right, that's that. I'm too tired to edit. Yeah, I don't know if karate will change for the better in that regard. I feel we're gonna have to run through a couple more generations before we kind of come out to a more generalized version of that. But
do you think it'll become less? Do you think over time it will become less about styles and just sort of stylistic and more about just what works?
If this counter-revolutionary propaganda I'm creating right now works, I mean, that's the plan. Like if there's a way to kind of like, not counter-revolutionary, sorry, revolutionary. We're on the other side.
Right.
We're pushing back against people coming on our shores to a degree.
Right.
Except being very open. That's a different podcast. Sorry, I'm mixing up the Bay of Pigs with this. I feel there's going to be a stronger push towards more practicality, more mixing, always going to bump up against perceived cultural notions, norms, and obviously ranking and style.
Mm-hmm.
Those things aren't necessarily opposed to each other, but they will inevitably bump up. So I feel we'll be able to get out of. There's no way out of it. There's just going to be a better way of and better attitudes of handling it. And I think once the next two or three generations kind of mull through it and kind of rediscover some different parts that aren't buried but are just not put on the forefront, we'll be in a better place for that, rather than running into what concrete throws and stuff like that.
Yeah, I can see that.
Well, aside from broken ribs, Sal, what else do you got going on this week?
Yeah, not a whole lot. This week's pretty much standard for me. Just usual training classes. Trying to get I need to get some more videos put together for Bujin TV. Trying to get some more beginner steel mace videos put together. It's just a matter of putting the time in and getting the recordings done. But when you don't have a camera person to hold the camera and do stuff, it's like you're kind of limited in how in depth you can go in some of that instruction. So I mean, that's always something I have on my to-do list, but I just haven't gotten around to it.
Hire a camera.
Yeah. Or camera wife, I don't know. Sometimes I can get her to hold the camera for me, but she's real busy too. But yeah, right now, no, things are pretty standard. Busy with work. I work at the university, so it's the start of semester next week. So it's busy, crazy, sort of uncertain as what's going to happen. There's a lot of traffic now because of all the students that are in town. So yeah, it'll be an interesting few weeks.
I've got that kind of things happening, but I've got to go boats, trains, and automobiles, and boats, planes, trains, and automobiles, all of it. I'm traveling by all modes of transportation in the next week. Yeah, it's going to be fun. I'm also going to be able to go down and see our friends down in Okinawa, finally.
Oh, nice.
Final. So stay tuned, folks. Those episodes hopefully will be coming after this. We'll see.
Awesome.
We'll see.
One of these days, I hope to get over there.
So. Yeah, I mean, like, once all this nonsense ends, which I think will be with, unfortunately, vaccination cards. I only say that as regards to, like, now we have to have that, but I don't say that as, people shouldn't be vaccinated. Please, if you are listening to this and you don't have any real issues, please get vaccinated.
Please.
Please, like, I want Sal to be able to hit me with the steel mace at some point in Japan. Okay? Just please, I don't want him to have to, like, get a completely different passport, like, as regards to health. That, like, if you don't want the, like, Blade Runner future, please, like, maybe Tank Girl future will be okay at some point, but please, come on, cool.
I mean, I take the flying cars from Blade Runner, but...
Sure, yeah, but I mean, like, but then you have to deal with, like, I don't know, Atari is still around for whatever reason, and then, like, where they make a huge comeback, and then we have Cylons or whatever, and then... I don't know. I don't want to have to go through a Turing test and find out that I am a robot. I'm going off the
way. Digressed again.
No, well, yeah, that's what happens when you get like 3 or 4 hours of sleep in little patches everywhere. Sal, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, always a pleasure.
Yeah, always a pleasure to have you on whatever we do. And
sure.
Cool, folks. Sal, thank you again. And folks, don't forget to keep training.